I like to say, when I open up a webinar, it's almost like flinging the doors open at Warwick's. It's like, come on in, everybody. Let's settle in for a great conversation here.
Woo.
Yoo-hoo! So, for those of you that don't know, I'm Julie Slavinsky. I'm the director of events at Warwick's. And we're here with Yvette and Rachel. And so, just to, while people are getting settled in a little bit, I always like to ask, Yvette, where are you calling in from today?
I'm in New York, just outside of Manhattan.
Awesome. And how is your weather today?
It was beautiful,
Beautiful fall
quintessential
day.
autumn day in New York. Little crisp, beautiful blue sky. It was really just picture
Oh,
perfect.
love it. And then Rachel, a lot of you know
I'm
Rachel,
in
but for
Toronto and
those of you that
yeah.
don't, Rachel's coming from
Um,
Toronto.
and Toronto has weather that's very similar to New York
Okay.
because when I go to New York, it's like an hour flight. So
Okay.
again, beautiful, crisp fall, all the beautiful leaf colors. Now, Canadian, I don't we call it Canadian Thanksgiving when I'm talking to Americans, but in our world, it's just Thanksgiving.
Right.
Um, and
Right.
Thanksgiving for us was this past weekend. And what we noticed was the leaves are usually quite brighter for the holiday, but they've been a bit muted this year because we had a warmer September. But I
Mm.
started seeing some of the trees really go all flamey on us. And one of the fun things, Yvette, is I actually live in Greektown in Toronto, which is
I knew I loved you.
where my big fat Greek wedding was filmed. It is one of the largest diasporas of Greek people outside of Greece live here. I am all the markets, all the restaurants, all the food, all the Greek Canadian flags parade several times a year. And so this is a ramble, sorry everybody, but one of my projects for this week is to take this beautiful book, Daughter of Ruins, around and snap it all around the
Oh
little piece of
yeah.
Greece that's in Toronto because Greece and the influence of Greece in New York and in Manhattan at the beginning of the 20th century is such an influential part of this book. So,
Yes.
Okay,
Yvette,
we're gonna
I'm
get
a
to
big
that.
fan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that will be so fun to see those pictures though.
I
Perfect,
can't
perfect
wait.
like social media stuff going on with that.
I know.
Okay. Well, we're located in La Jolla, San Diego, if those of you not familiar with Warwick's, and we had a really gloomy, weird day. It's like we don't really have seasons here. Basically, the temperature is like between 68 and 80 for like 90% of the year. But it's kind of a gloomy day here. But so anyways, for those of you that are in San Diego, I'm going to put how to order Yvette's book in the chat. If you're here in our area, we'd love for you to stop by the store. There's lots of great stuff to see here, but we can also ship it to you. Sorry, the 48 contiguous though, is where we can ship to. Also I know that you all know how to use we've been doing Zoom for 4+ years now. Down at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. We always love audience questions. Rachel and Yvette are going to talk for about a half hour, 35 minutes. But if you have any questions for either of them, please put those in the Q&A and I will bring those to them after they are done with the conversation. That Q&A button's just at the bottom of your screen. So let me introduce these lovely ladies and then I'll go away for a little bit. So Yvette, I forgot to ask how to pronounce it. Is it Corporon?
Corporon, Yvette Manessis Corporon.
Corporon. She is an internationally best-selling author and Emmy award-winning producer. To date, her books have been translated into 16 languages. A first-generation Greek American
Wow.
with deep family roots in Corfu, Yvette studied classical civilization and journalism at New York University. And as she said, she's in New York, where she's with her family, where she spends her spare time reading, running, and I love this, trying to get yoga in. We're all trying to get that exercise in,
Yep.
right? She's here today to talk about her new book, Daughter of Ruins. And joining her is
So good.
it's so good. So good. Joining her is Rachel McMillan. Rachel is the author of several novels, historical fiction, mysteries, and romance. She's also an agent and just all around champion of all things books and authors. We've been doing events together with Rachel since the pandemic, and it's been an amazing partnership, and we just adore you. So,
Oh,
with that, I'm going to head out. You all have a great conversation.
thanks so much, Julie. And thanks,
Thanks.
Yvette. Oh my gosh, I am such a fan. I think you're an amazing person, and the everyone watching, just the busiest person in the world who is
Uh,
always,
did you hear
always
your own
supporting
resume?
people.
Did you hear your own resume? I feel like I have a lot on my shoulders, and then I'm like, oh, Rachel is an agent. She's an author. She's this. She's that. And you're like helping serve Thanksgiving meals. You're everywhere.
Oh, well, I like books and it's really wonderful. We share a publisher now with Harper Muse, and I was so excited to learn a little bit more about you. But everyone who is watching, if you've seen some of my interviews before, you know that I'm especially passionate about traveling to other places through fiction. When I read, that's how I take vacations, and that's how the world opens up. And we are so fortunate in Daughter of Ruins because you take us to America, you take us to Greece. There's a bit of an Italian influence.
Yeah.
There's all this lush history. You've written so extensively about beautiful, tantalizing Greece. And I do want to shout out to Something Beautiful Happened, the true story that you wrote is 2017 of an amazing tailor, his descendants, the reconciliation between past and present. How did the deeply real and emotive experience of that book prepare you to write another multi-generational, albeit fictional story? Did anything translate from that to Daughter of Ruins?
Oh, for sure. And thank you. Thank you so much for your beautiful questions and also for sharing my love of travel through literature and my love of Greece as well. I might hop on the plane and come take those photos with you in Greek town. I'm very tempted. Um, yeah, as you said, so my memoir, Something Beautiful Happened, is my memoir of searching for the family that my grandmother helped hide and save from the Nazis on our little tiny Greek island. And I had listened to this story throughout my entire life, most of my childhood. My grandmother lived with us, and I kind of filed it away. And it wasn't until I had studied in Israel, I'd visited Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum, I'd done all the things, but I'd never stopped to think about that my grandmother's story was just as important and significant as all the stories I read about in history and saw at the museum. And it wasn't until I was a working journalist and until I became a mother that I put everything under that umbrella of would I do what my grandmother did and risk the life of my own child to save another woman's child? That I kind of looked at it through a different lens and said, oh, there's something really significant here. And then the journalism hat kicked in, and I did a deep dive investigating what happened and what happened to this family, because after the war, no one knew what happened to them. And I couldn't believe that everyone on this tiny island risked everything to save this family, and then they just disappeared into the ether. So it took me several years, but I sought them out and I found them. And Something Beautiful Happened is the extraordinary story of what happened. First of all, how I found them, and then what happened after we found each other. Um, and I think that was such a daunting task for me. I could do the work, I could do the journalism, but these women who survived did not speak of the Holocaust to their families. When I found the families, they had no idea what I was talking about. I was crying. I was like, I can't believe I found you. I've been looking for you. My grandmother saved yours. And they were like, what are you talking about? Because, like so many survivors, the women kept their stories private and they didn't want to relive the trauma. So it was very daunting to think about, well, I definitely want to write this story. There's something significant here, but who am I to tell this story if the women never talked of it? What right do I have? And so I huddled with the families, and they both families wanted their stories told. And that was such a daunting, terrifying writing journey that once I did that, I kind of wasn't as afraid anymore because I figured if I could do that and it involves real life people, I can do a deep dive into fictional families, no matter how emotional their journeys and no matter all the terrible things I put my characters through. I feel bad for them. But it pales in comparison to what these real families went through. So it gave me confidence to write and to really sort of stretch my writing wings.
And I love it. And also, you still honor the stories of those women, even if you're telling through a fictional lens. And a few
Yes.
weeks ago with Madeline Martin, many of the readers who were interacting with were talking about how she has propensity to deep dive into the research, and that's what people love. And I love that you come to your fiction with that journalistic
Yeah.
lens because you are still a truth teller and a storyteller. And often when I interview, especially female writers, um, about historical fiction, about 20th century historical fiction, it is a common theme and denominator that women interred their stories.
Oh,
They
yeah.
kept them, they pondered them, they worked through them without a platform, without sharing. And that is why women are the great secret keepers. There's just a
Absolutely.
natural tendency to w women make amazing spies. Women make amazing humans who are able to hide people and information because we are used to keeping things close. Your grandmother's stories ring through your nonfiction, of course, as we just said. And here in Daughter of Rumens, the female narrative is at the crux of
Yeah.
three women's interconnected stories. And so we just hinted at this, but I did want to ask you, why are women such vital witnesses to history? And what burden do you feel in excavating their stories? That's a huge question, so I
That's a
apologize.
huge question, and I'm up for that challenge because this is something I ask myself every time I sit down to tell a story. And this is something that I asked myself with Something Beautiful Happened. My grandmother was illiterate. She was provincial. She lived in this country in the US for 40 years and never learned to speak English. And she was of a generation, and so many of the women that I write about are of the generations of your value was and your worth were designated to the kitchen and to the bedroom. And their opinions did not matter. My grandmother's opinion did matter in our home, but she lived a very simple life and she had her tasks and that was it. And so to give my grandmother voice in my memoir meant the world to me. And after looking at her story, I was really, the spark just kind of lit a fuse in me of giving the voiceless women who came before me a voice because there were so many women, beautiful, brilliant, wonderful women whose opinions were extraordinary, who were insightful, who were told that their voices did not matter. And so to give these women voices and to tell their stories all these years later, and sort of lift the veil as to what society maybe did not um, think about or value them for so many years later just means everything to me. And I love it. I love giving voice to the once voiceless.
Do you feel that consciously or even subconsciously that that is why you went into journalism? Perhaps to reclaim the truth-telling and voice of the women in your history who didn't have that opportunity?
Well, I mean, let me tell you, I think as a child of immigrants, and this is not unique to my family, this is not unique to my story. The weight of the history of your family is always right here. And the weight of what my family went through. I tell this story all the time. My grandmother and I, growing up, our bedrooms were next to each other. We shared a common wall. On her side of the wall were icons of Saint Spiridon and
Mm.
Baraya, the Virgin Mother. On my side were, posters of Rod Stewart and Duran Duran. And I remember coming home from college, right? Coming home from NYU, studying for my degree, my double degree, my double major in journalism and classical civilizations, and passing her bedroom. And there my grandmother was sitting up in bed, struggling to read a children's book of myths. And that irony was not lost on me of in a span of my grandmother's lifetime to mine, how different our lives were. The woman had never been on a plane other than come, to go back and forth to Greece. She didn't speak English. She never drove a car. She never worked outside the home, never wrote a check, never handled money other than
Right.
here's for the groceries. And look at my life. Look at all of my opportunities. And again, the irony of the difference in our lives was not lost on me. And when I was a child, I have to be honest, I was like, okay, yeah, see you later, Yaya. I went up to my
Of
room,
course, yeah.
you know, Okay, great story. You hit the Jews. Amazing. Bye. I'm going to go listen to Duran Duran. But, as I got older, as I matured, and again, as I became a parent myself, the weight and the value and the beauty and the magnitude of the stories of these women who, led these simple but extraordinary lives just stayed with me. And I wanted to tell their stories. And as far as being a journalist, I'm nosy. I'm like I like to know everything and everyone's business, and I like to know what's happening, and I like to tell stories. I've always liked to tell stories. So I think it's a combination of like all these things coming together. Um, so I'm a writing journalist.
And that
Run.
insatiable curiosity to anyone watching is going to be what draws you to Yvette's stories because you are going to want to know what she knows. She has this magnificent sense of dramatic irony where she knows where she's taking the stories of these women, but you cannot turn the pages fast enough, but then you'll linger on a beautiful line and want to stay a little bit longer on a page. And it's just my perfect reading experience.
Thank you.
And
From
from
you, coming from you, I mean, your words are lyrical. Your
oh,
writing is beautiful.
so
Thank
nice.
you.
Well, for lack of a better word, your feelings for Greece as a canvas are big. Like
Yes.
as the TikTok kids would say, Greece to you has vibes. Your devotion for introducing its beautiful canvas and translating that beauty to all of us is not only evident in your fiction, but also the work you do. You do tours, you share intimately everything you love about Greece on your social media accounts. Do you learn more and more about this muse country of yours, this epoch and anchor of your own history with the research of every book?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I also realize that in my book, I am pining for and I am honoring a Greece that some may never know because so much of the Greece that I write about is the Greece of my childhood, which is the traditional Greece where the grandmothers were not educated, where when I would pull up in the little kaiki, the little fishing boats to visit my father's island of Erikusa, just off the coast of Corfu, we sat on the chicken boat, like, on top of the crates of chickens next to like the barrels of feta. And the boat would pull in, and all the widows dressed in black would be sitting at the port with their white handkerchiefs, waving and to see who was coming and going, to gossip about the Americans later on, because, Greek leaders love nothing more than to gossip. Um, but it was a very different time. And the Athens of my childhood is not the Athens of today. Athens of today is cosmopolitan and European. And Greece, as I knew it growing up, was way more provincial. The markets of Corfu, you know, had live chickens. And today, they're filled with international tourists, this cosmopolitan aura. So it is a little different. And I pine for that Greece. I love the Greece of today. But I pine for that Greece and I'm very nostalgic for that Greece. And that has a lot to do with the Greece that I share in my stories. And also, there's so much, I'm such a voracious reader of historical fiction. I love it. I love cultural historical fiction. And there are some incredible writers who focus on Greece, but not nearly as many. We don't have, right? We have so
I
many wonderful books about
yes.
World War II, France. Oh my
Oh
God.
my gosh, let's
Keep full
retire
and never get
Paris.
tired.
Yes.
England, France, you know, Prague, Vienna, your cities,
Hmm.
gorgeous. And I'm constantly looking for more and more quality books on Greece and Greek culture and history. And they're there, but I want more of them. And so I'm happy to kind of help fill that void.
You're writing. And I love the fact that the term nostalgia, its roots and etymology come from a translation that means home pain,
Yeah.
a longing for home. And
Oh, yeah.
there's that longing in Daughter of Ruins, especially with one of your heroines who is a picture girl who goes to Manhattan. And we tend to romanticize the immigrant experience where so many people cross over, see the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, and start
Yeah.
these new lives without recognizing the rip from the fabric
Yeah.
of their families and everything they loved. And you capture it so well.
Thank you.
So you've got three heroines here. We have Demetra, and if I say these wrong, please cut me off. Elena and Maria, and they have varying life experiences, and they're strong and resilient, but not in a way that portrays women as um anachronistic to their time period.
Right.
I think that even women in so many different traditional roles, not to get too politicized, are actually strong in those roles. Some women are called to be, your grandmother sounds like a remarkably strong woman, even if she never had money. Um,
Right.
how how much of the women in your life during the creation of these women, or in hindsight after creating these women, reminded you of, are you like a piece of Velcro? Do you feel that you kind of pick up little
Oh my gosh.
traits?
I pick up everything. It's like careful. It's so true what they say, right? Careful, any conversation that you have around an author, it might show up 10 years later, or that seed might plant and then sprout something. So, careful what you say.
And was there anything blatant that you had to tell your family or,
No, there's
anyone?
nothing. I mean, there's nothing in that regard that, oh, careful, I'm gonna spill the beans on this. But I will say, my childhood was such a rich cultural childhood. My grandparents came over from Greece and they settled in the Bronx, which was a thriving, thriving immigrant community. We were the only Greek family in a street of all Italian immigrants who had just come over escaping after World War II, right? And so this rich cultural history, and I was immersed in it, and that's what I grew up in. The languages and the culture and the food. And a little bit of the xenophobia because the Italians, even though they welcomed my family, the Italians stuck together, and the Greeks stuck together. And even though they went about their daily lives, they were so afraid of losing their cultural identity that you didn't marry outside of your own community. You didn't socialize outside your own community. And so those experiences of growing up in that rich new immigrant experience neighborhood really stuck with me. And that really shaped the part of the story where they come over to the US and they settle in the Bronx and they're struggling. Like there's a scene where, a young boy, Gerasimos, just they're in the Bronx in the apartment buildings, and he came from Kefalonia, this beautiful island. And even though it was impoverished and they left for a reason, he missed the sea,
Oh,
just the
absolutely.
natural beauty. And so, his sister took him on a bus to Orchard Beach, but even though they call Orchard Beach the Riviera of the Bronx, it's not quite the Ionians. You know what I mean? So it's these experiences of like piling in the car and going to Orchard Beach with all the immigrants, that just stayed with me. And, provide such rich source material for all of those chapters.
And it's partly why a little moment here of Toronto is known as possibly the most multicultural city in the world.
Mm.
And why I love it is because it is a mosaic in terms of keeping the culture as much as we can. And New York is like that you can
Yeah.
visit little tastes, but it does not replicate the experience of where people came from. What they can do is hopefully offer the best of what their history
Yeah.
is to boring Canadians from small towns like myself. And I just think that your passion for travel and your passion for your history inspires your dedication to this story because truly, readers, you are going to really want to book a trip to Greece after this. And another major motif in the story is motherhood. And I know
Yeah.
you have daughters, and I know that you were close with your grandmother, with generations of women. Did you do you ever start out thinking these are the themes that I really want to come across? Or do you start writing the narrative and do you find yourself surprised when something is so potent or poignant in the story and when you hear from readers like, "Oh, I had no idea that this was a major theme for you."
Yeah, I mean, isn't that like one of the most incredible experiences of writing is like
Yeah.
you have this vision, you have this thought, you live with this baby for so long. And I had certain themes like my last book Where the Wandering Ends was about home, right? Wanting to be home no matter what the cost. Like just that we all have that communal desire to be home. And it was a love story, and it was a love story of two friends. And the end is a little ambiguous, but I leave it up to you to decide what their relationship is. But to me, it was a love story between two childhood friends. My first book was also a love story, and it was about love story between a grandmother and a granddaughter. Now, this book here is a love story between women, and it is very much about mothers. But a lot of it is about the depths of a mother's love who is absent from her child and how a mother still loves, even if she can't physically take care of her child, and the sacrifices that a mother is willing to make in order for her child to thrive, even if it means that she can't physically be with her child. So all of those themes, I love a good romance just like anybody else, but I'm not as interested in writing or exploring romances. I like to explore different types of love affairs. And in this
Love that.
story, the women, the relationships between these women, how they support one another, lift each other up, was so much fun to explore. And I loved it because, just you look at the relationships in your own life, the women who are dear to you and what you would do for them and what they mean to you. And I loved kind of putting my lens on that and seeing how I could bring that to life on the page.
And I think that sometimes we use the term romance just to see a couple get together
Yeah.
by the end in the traditional sense. But I love reading and experience romance in the initial sense of the term, which is a sensibility, like the romance of a new location, the romance of a new friendship, the romance of a wonderful conversation that lasts forever, or a beautiful meal, or a color you've never seen before. And that's something I think you evoke so beautifully in your work, that they are romantic reads, even if they're not the traditional man meets woman.
So
And
many
we
different kinds of love stories,
Oh,
right?
and
Love story ends up with, two people tangled between the sheets, which that's fun too. That's a great book too. But there's so many different types of love stories. Not all of them are romantic.
and the in between the sheets is almost transactional for one part of the story, because one of your heroines actually is one of the picture brides, which is one of the many tenets of mail order brides,
Yes.
where people you'd see the picture and women went over. Um, Had this part of history always been familiar to you, or did you learn anything? And it's not just in Greek culture. I
No.
am going to go out on a limb and say every culture has had some form of women being selected by men to help them establish something.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so, I think that we're probably most people are familiar with the Japanese picture brides. We've heard that term
Yeah.
more frequently. But think about, the early immigrants to this country, I'm focusing on the Italian and the Greek immigrants. The men came over and they were here without any women. And it was out of the question. They were not going to marry American women at that point. And so to build a foundation of a family and a community and churches, they needed women in order to build that foundation, and they didn't exist here. So it was kind of like, then you had these impoverished families in Greece, fathers who couldn't afford to feed their children, and they would send their eldest daughter over. They would get a small dowry. They would send their daughters over, and everybody wins. I wasn't so familiar with the idea of the Greek picture brides until fairly recently. I paid a visit to the Hellenic Museum in Chicago. A friend of mine, Prince Nikolaos of Greece, is an artist, as well as being the son of the last king of Greece, I should say. And he was opening an art exhibit in Chicago. My husband and I went. And while I was there, I walked around and took in the rest of the exhibit. And the museum director showed me some photos and told me about the picture brides. And I remember hearing about it at some point, but in that moment, I was like, oh, okay, there is something here. So fairly recently, I kind of, that little spark when I heard it. Again, you never know what conversation is going to spark an idea or a book, right?
Oh,
You never know what's going to stay with you. And so that kind of that hit the switch for me, and I started researching and I was fascinated by them.
and I actually Googled, because that's what I do. And to see, I love seeing pictures of women from years ago,
Yeah.
trying to read the expressions, trying to read what the clothing meant.
Yeah.
It's just if anyone reads Daughter of Ruins, Google Greek picture brides and you will see some fascinating women. And what
Yeah.
I especially love is seeing pictures that seem so immediate and so modern, that these are women we could actually know. And do
Yeah.
we actually know their descendants? Have we run into them? It's just fascinating. I have been going on far too long, but there is such a cinematic quality to each one of your stories, and I fall in love with your descriptions. Do you let the muse take you, or do you carefully outline? I mean, with three different stories, as in Daughter of Ruins, it must have been a bit of a juggling act to try and keep everything. And we work for the same team, so I know all the people you're working with, and I'm sure some of them did try to rein you in terms of, okay.
Good luck to them. Good luck to Becky. Becky, my editor, Becky, earned her keep on.
Oh, isn't she
She's the
wonderful?
best. She's the best.
Yeah.
I say this to her all the time. I don't know what magic she invoked, what like chance incantations, because this book was so out of control. And I've shared with you, Rachel, I've shared with
We
you.
have talked because we were both going through, well, I'm still going through my thing. I'm on like draft 11, but yeah, it's harder. Everyone at home, it's harder than it looks.
This book was nearly, and I'm not exaggerating, nearly double the word count that it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And when like the due date came, and I was like, okay, Becky, I can get it to you by Monday. And I'm currently at, it was like 170,000 words or something, or 180. And she was like, she went to Amanda's office. She went to our publisher's office. She said, and she was like, what do I do with this? And so they gave me a few more days. I was like, I know. And I took some time and I reined it in. But you never know what thread to pull and where that's going to
It's
lead
like a
you. And
Jenga game. If you pull something out, you end up having to do a whole thing. And I think it's really important. And one of the things I try to do here with authors is for readers to be transparent, because I know readers are like, when is the book coming out? Why isn't it out yet? Does it have a date change? All of this. Oh, I noticed one spelling mistake on page 15. I think it's important for everyone to know exactly how much work goes into all of this.
let me say, the sausage factory ain't pretty sometimes. It is.
And you get the book and you read it in a day, and or you get it from Amazon, and but you should be ordering from your indie bookstores.
Yeah.
If you order Daughter of Ruins in Canada, there's many indie bookstores to order it from. And in the States, you've got Julie, you've got so many places, but sometimes, we'll get feedback on, well, the Amazon box was dinged or it was left in the rain. It's like, okay, well, 4 years of my life was trying to cut 20,000 words.
Yeah, no, and you never know, right? So you start with an idea and a
Yeah.
vision and a theme, and then you start writing. And sometimes the characters come to life, and sometimes you introduce a character and their story takes off. Like the picture bride. I
Yes.
I knew that I wanted to introduce her in some capacity, but when I started writing those scenes, they just came effortlessly. And there were other scenes, all the stuff that got cut, that I remember just staring at my computer sometimes like this, like, what am I going to fill this
How do,
stupid
how
page
do
with?
I how do I lose it? And I think that you were probably at that point just taking to the character's dictation.
Yeah.
But there's
And
no
they
such
start
thing.
telling you their story. That's when you know I need to follow this tangent.
And there's no such thing as a wasted word. I am sure you will
Mm.
repurpose some of those extra words in another book, but I should pass it back to Julie to see if we have any questions from readers. Um, pardon me, so it's not just Rachel rambling all day.
We love Rachel rambling.
I'm all for Rachel Rambles.
Me too. It's always so good. But it's such a fascinating conversation because honestly, so I'm from Serbian and Basque descent, and my grandmother was not so much a picture bride, but was
Oh,
from my because my
wow.
Arranged
grandfather.
marriage.
Well, he sent back for her. He had a first marriage. His wife passed away, so he sent back to the village for somebody to come and help him raise his children. And so she was
I
sort of
have one of
the
those in this book as well.
yeah,
It's
Yeah,
amazing.
one of the brides comes over because the mom died in childbirth,
right.
and he sends for a new bride, and he happens to be the nicest of the grooms, actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
And I
it's
love a nice guy.
yeah, and so it's just I mean you're right. I think every culture of a certain generation we have
Yeah.
that. We
My
have that.
my Oma, my grandmother, was a war bride from Holland.
Yeah.
Oh,
Who came my grandfather, yeah, I write this in the London Restoration. He was with the Canadian Armed Forces and he refused to carry a gun because he was so a pacifist. So he carried stretchers instead. And I wrote that into a book.
I
And that's
love
my
that.
family legacy, but he didn't talk about the war. But yes, we have war. She was a war bride from Holland who moved to this new country not speaking any English.
Well, and
And
that too was the thing. I think, not speaking about, he did speak about the war, the women who don't speak about,
yeah.
the atrocities that happened. There's something about that generation of women that just shouldered it all. They
Oh,
just
it's like, can
they
you
and
imagine leaving to a country where you're living in a small village, a farm village, and not speaking
yeah,
the language?
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
It's okay. Well,
it's
anyway,
amazing.
there was a question. I could go off
Yeah.
talking to you all about all kinds of stuff too today. So, so Jane has a question for you, Yvette, and I'm sorry if you already answered this because I was doing some other thing in the back with the tech thing. She wants to know, did you grow up speaking Greek at home?
Yes, Greek was my first language. So my mom came to the US when she was 18, my dad when he was 15. And so they spoke Greek at home with our family, and my mom learned English along with me. So we spoke Greek at home first, and then I learned English from my friends. And then my mom learned English as well.
What do you remember about how old you were when you were learning English? Was it like kindergarten age-ish or
I mean, it was kind of like osmosis because the TV and everything around me, but in our home, it was Greek. So
yeah,
Greek was very much my first language.
Love it.
But I would not say that English was my second language. I'd say English was the primary at home, and then
right.
I simultaneously learned to speak
Yeah.
English.
Together it was, yeah.
Yeah.
And if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. But Rachel, I have one for you
Oh, for me.
because for you, and it kind of goes back to your conversation both of you had earlier about different wanting more historical fiction about things. And so I follow like Rachel, I'm a little bit like you, obsessed with books, and it says I follow way too many things on Facebook and different groups and things. Somebody asked in a Facebook group, and I can't remember which it was, Friends in Fiction or something, about any books about historical fiction about Canada.
And
And I was very fascinated by that because I was like, well, I don't
well,
know that I know any.
for a long time, we weren't allowed. Like, I've always had an American agent and American publishers, and my first series is set in Edwardian Toronto, historical mysteries. But many of the publishers we went to said if she moves it to Chicago or New York, we'll take it. But Toronto and Toronto's history in the Edwardian era is very much a history of immigration, which is what makes me passionate. There's no such thing as all Canadian. We are made up of everyone who, as the Newfoundlanders say, I love Newfoundland, are come from away. And so I really wanted to focus on that. Fortunately, there's more and more. We do have wonderful Canadian authors who capture it. Margaret Atwood, of course, and
Of
Alias
course.
Mm.
Grace is one of the main ones. And I have a client, because in my day job, I'm a literary agent, Christine Stuntz, who has a book coming out. And when she queried me, I know she had no idea that I was Canadian and from Toronto, but it's coming out next year in June, and it's set during the closest Canada came to Civil War. So we've got Jane Urquhart, who's written some beautiful books. There's a new one by Donna Alward about the Halifax explosion in 1917, which was the largest man-made explosion before the atomic bomb. So I should actually sneak into that because sometimes with friends in fiction, I'm dear friends with all those ladies, but I
Right.
can't keep up with everything going on there.
I don't know if that's where I saw it. It was
Um,
I was
but
scrolling through today. Who knows?
there is a ton, and I hope people ask me for it. Because any type of period, one thing I will say is a lot of people just if you take like 40 seconds, you can find so many things. In New Orleans, which is one of my favorite American city, the Cajun culture is from our Acadian culture
Hmm.
in Atlantic Canada. Cajun is where all the Acadian diaspora happened when the British, always the British redcoats, forced them out. They went to Louisiana. Beignet, most of the street names are from that French Canadian culture that we have. So I would love
Yep.
people to write me more because yes, I'm tired and I'm blanking on things, but there's a
But yeah,
lot.
no,
And
but it was fascinating because it was one of those things where
Wow.
I kind of did a little bit of
yeah.
a Scooby Doo, like, oh, that is
And
a good
I
question.
my first six books were actually set in Toronto, historical mystery, because I that's what editors wanted. So I got in the door. Not sure I'm great at the mystery part, but the historical part, super fun. And we have quite a fascinating history that aligns a lot with American history
Right,
because
right.
we're neighbors,
Native. Right,
right?
right, right, right. A native land. Okay,
Yeah.
Yvette, and I know this is always asking somebody something that's like a little like, oh, because I can never when I put on the spot. Any books that you've read recently or other authors that you would like to lift up, and something that's like struck your fancy
Well,
recently?
I'm currently reading The Liberty Scarf.
Oh,
Right.
yay!
Rachel McMillan, and
Oh,
Amy Runyon and Janelle, correct?
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
When is that coming out, Rachel?
November 19th.
Oh, that's coming. That's
It
coming
is
Yeah,
quick.
that's soon,
fantastic.
eh?
It is
Yeah.
just, it is beautiful. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I recently finished The Fabled Earth by Kimberly Brock, who just
Oh,
the writing,
beautiful book.
the writing. Oh my goodness. I felt with this book, with Kim, and Kimberly is a dear friend as well. And I know she's a friend of yours as well,
We've
Rachel.
done Kim Brock
I
here, I
think we
believe,
did. I
Julie.
think
I
we
think we
did.
did the
The
first one, yeah.
writing in this book was reminded me of All the Light We Cannot See. I
Mm.
savored each sentence. It's beautiful. I'm a huge cultural historical fiction. Like throw me in another country, another era, and that's my jam. Lion Women of Tehran,
Oh,
Marjan Mali. I
good. That was a
adore,
bestseller here too. Yep.
adore. And I'm now reading A Together Tea, a previous
Mm.
book of Marjan's. Khaled Hosseini, Amy
Oh,
Tan, Isabel Allende, like those are just,
And
that's,
women, powerful women,
yes.
women who are powerful within their sphere.
Yes.
It's
Women who
uh
were told they are
yeah.
not powerful, but find their power.
right. There's a history book. I love following her. She's a government teacher. Sharon says so. It's a history book called Small and Mighty about women that are just like, the untold stories. But it is a straight history book though. But yeah, and it's the same sort of theme, like women who just like, and I think there's some men in there too, but that just were like,
We
didn't know
love
that
men.
didn't know they
Women
were
are
as
good.
mighty.
Me too.
Didn't know they were as
I like
mighty.
writing men too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we like them. They're okay.
Yeah.
Rachel, anything you've read lately that you want to talk
Um,
about?
Obviously Fag and the Thief by Ellison Epstein,
Yes.
which
Yep.
is one of our what
Potentials.
my goodness. Ellison Epstein wrote two gorgeous books, Tip for the Hangman and the other one that I
I'm
totally
blanking on
endorsed
the
and
other one too, because Tip for
blanking
the
on the other
Hangman's
one,
with it. Yeah.
but it is beautiful. Please do not take my forgetting title. I'm a literary agent. My entire life is titles. It doesn't mean it wasn't a beautiful book, but Fagin the Thief imagines the life of Jacob Fagin before he was given the Dickensian treatment. And it is such an amazing look at Victorian London, which is totally my catnip, but also in Dickens' hands, fictionally, there's so much anti-Semitism within the artistry around Fagin, within the mythology of Fagin, that Epstein is reclaiming that part of the narrative and really shining a light on a fascinating dimensional character. And then I'm also reading Miranda Hart's new book. I haven't been completely honest with you. She's a British comedian who had her own
Oh,
sitcom called Miranda.
yes.
Um, she is my favorite kind of humor because she's kind of self-deprecating. And during the pandemic, we had some super, you know this, Julie, because I was hanging out with you on Zoom.
You're
We had some
hanging.
super long lockdowns in Toronto. And of course, I could not see anybody because I live alone. And her Facebook stories about being alone and being isolated and the humor just kind of kept me going. And she is writing a lot about that and some of her health challenges, but in a wonderfully warm and optimistic and self-deprecating way that I just love.
Love it. Okay, we're going to wrap up here a little bit, but before we do, I want to find out from both of you what you're working on next. So, Rachel, you want to go first?
I'm on draft 27,000 of Operation Scarlet, which is coming out, everybody. It really is. My publisher has been amazing. I keep telling people, yes, I could have phoned it in and had it out and moved on with my life, but I can't do that. I need it to be where I want it to be. So draft 27,000 of that. Hopefully it'll be out soon. And then Liberty Scarf comes out on November the 19th. And then I'm almost finished my biography of Sir Christopher Wren, the architect,
Oh,
for a
yay.
UK publisher, which is trying to take this amazing, magnanimous historical figure and making it accessible to everyone so you don't have to be an academic to enjoy learning about this. I'm such a geek, and hopefully that passion translates. So
Oh,
Awesome.
I'm never not working on something.
Something. Yvette, what are you working on next?
I allowed myself to press pause for a minute because this book nearly killed me. And I too have a day job. So I, but now that I've been still for a couple of months, the wheels are
The
turning.
the itch.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
jumping right back in head first. It's definitely going to, there is a figure in modern Greek history, a little bit more modern this time, who was a real iconic cultural figure. A friend of mine described her to me as like the first Kim Kardashian of Greece back in the 1950s.
Ooh,
So I'm just kind
Oh,
of toying with the
50s.
idea of doing a historical biography for the first time. And the themes of her story are just, it's about art and cultural identity and nationalism. And then, of course, since it's me, there's a bunch of mythology that I can throw in as well.
well,
So,
because that's just naturally
I
just there.
love
But
that.
there's nothing
yeah,
more than the
yeah,
50s and the 60s and that time period. Oh,
yeah.
gold, lots of rich gold in there.
So we'll see.
Yep,
That's what
sounds
I'm thinking.
fascinating. And so before we go, I'm going to ask each of you too where you want people to follow you on your social. So Rachel, why don't you go first on that?
Yeah, you can find me anywhere at Rach K Mick, RACHKMC. It's my handle for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Twitter is usually where I'm talking about the publishing business because I'm trying really hard to open the doors of the enigma that is publishing for pre-published authors and people who are interested in the scary world we
I
work in.
know.
So,
I know. It's that unknown thing.
yes.
And Yvette, how about you? Where do you spend any time on social media with
I
people?
do, I do. So I'm on Instagram at Yvette Corporon. My full name is Yvette Manessis Corporon, but you can find me at Yvette Corporon on Insta, but it'll come up if you put
I
all.
love her Insta. It's so cool. She's gone to the Met Ball more than once. Oh yeah, her
Every
life is
year.
cool. We have the coolest person.
Okay,
I
I
don't know
just
about
I
that.
just finished a book that I think you're going to want to read next year, Yvette. It's called Friends of the Museum. And
Oh,
I can't remember the author's name. I'm a horrible person, but Friends of the Museum. It takes place one day of this museum leading up to their gala. It's not the
Uh,
Met Gala, but it's like all of the curators. It's really, really fun and
yeah.
good.
Well, the Met Ball is May 5th this year. Also, the Diddy trial starts on May 5th this year. So
There
busy
we
days
Pop
go.
for us.
culture,
We're used to
everything.
seeing Diddy on the carpet at the Met Ball. We'll be covering him in court in the morning and then
Wow.
going to the Met Ball at night.
Crazy,
Yeah.
crazy, crazy. Okay, so Instagram, sorry, I totally sidetracked you
Instagram
on
and
that.
Facebook. Facebook,
Okay,
Yvette Manessis Corporon.
okay, perfect.
I'm on
Well,
And
TikTok, but I don't
she's
know
the
what to do with it.
kindest. So if anyone didn't get to to ask a question now when you're watching the YouTube, I know Yvette is the kindest person in the
Oh,
world, and she would not
you're
mind a
so
question
sweet.
from you after
Oh,
about the book.
please.
yep.
I'd be send them my way, please.
Love it. Ladies, this has been a great
Thanks,
conversation.
Julie.
Can't
Thank you.
Thank
wait for people
you.
to read your book and tell the next one. And everybody, happy reading.
Thank
Have a
you
good
so
night.
much.
Thank
Thank
you so
you. Thank you
much.
so
Bye,
much.
everybody.
Bye.